Venus rotates once every 243 days. Its day is longer than its year. That makes it different to almost everything else that we observe within the solar system.
They told us Venus was dead, just a furnace of toxic clouds and molten rock. But what if that was only half the truth? For decades, Soviet probes landed on Venus, sent back data, and then mysteriously fell silent. Photos vanished, and readings were dismissed.
On March 5th, 1982, the Soviet Union's Venera 14 lander successfully touched down.
And only now, with modern technology and declassified archives, are we starting to see what they may have been hiding all along. What the Soviet Union found on Venus didn't just confuse scientists, but terrified them. And it might rewrite everything we thought we knew.
A Soviet space probe reaches the hottest planet in the solar system.
Venus is really an inhospitable place.
The planet science abandoned, but the Soviets wouldn't let go. Venus is the planet most like Earth in size, and yet it may be the most hostile world in the solar system. Imagine standing on a planet where the air would crush you flat, the heat would melt lead, and the rain, if it reached the ground, would be made of sulfuric acid. That's Venus. Its surface temperature averages over 900 degrees Fahrenheit, 475 degrees, hotter than the surface of Mercury, despite being farther from the Sun. The atmospheric pressure is 90 times that of Earth, the equivalent of being 3,000 feet underwater. And the clouds are a choking haze of carbon dioxide laced with sulfuric acid. Most space agencies took one look at these numbers and turned away, but not the Soviet Union. Between the 1960s and 1980s, while the US focused on the Moon and Mars, the Soviets became obsessed with Venus. Through their Venera program, they launched over 30 missions to the planet. Most failed. Some never even left Earth's atmosphere. But the USSR kept pushing and kept trying. Why? In 1970, Venera 7 became the first spacecraft to land on another planet and transmit data back to Earth. It lasted just 23 minutes. But for Soviet scientists, that was enough to prove the impossible was possible. Then came Venera 9 and 10 in 1975, sending back the first black and white photographs of another world's surface. The images showed flat, cracked stones under an eerie, orange-tinged sky. The world watched in awe. For the first time, humanity had seen the ground of another planet. But the crown jewels of the Venera program came in the early 1980s. Venera 13 and 14, launched in 1981, were technological monsters built to withstand hell. They survived over 2 hours on the Venusian surface, far longer than any probe before them. They sent back full-color images, sound recordings of Venusian winds, and even conducted soil composition analysis with onboard instruments. It was the most direct look at another planet humanity had ever achieved. And yet, most of that data quietly disappeared. Unlike NASA, which regularly released entire datasets for public analysis, the USSR only published fragments. Entire photo sequences were missing. Metadata had been stripped. The images shared were blurred, cropped, or redacted. And when questioned, Soviet officials gave vague answers, often brushing off requests as classified or irrelevant. Still, the Soviets continued. In 1984, the final Soviet mission to Venus, Vega 2, was launched with only a lander, but a balloon probe designed to float in the upper atmosphere. Why balloons? Because that's where conditions are most Earth-like. Temperatures are manageable. Pressure is survivable. It's where some scientists quietly theorized that life, if it existed, might be hiding. Then, just like that, the missions stopped. The USSR collapsed, and for the next 4 decades, Venus exploration largely went dark. NASA turned its attention to Mars. The SA and Japan dabbled in atmospheric studies, but no one landed anything new, except the Soviets, who had already landed, taken photos, and measured strange atmospheric spikes, and who, curiously, never told us the whole story. The question has haunted scientists for years, and now even Joe Rogan wonders, why did the Soviet Union pour so much effort into a planet everyone else gave up on? What did they find there that made them stay? The answer may lie not in what they said, but in what they hid. The 2012 reanalysis that changed everything. In 2012, a storm began brewing in the scientific community, sparked not by a new mission to space, but by the re-examination of old Soviet data.
The first missions to explore the Earth's neighbor were carried out by the Soviet Union.
At the center of this storm was Leonid Sanfomality, a Russian physicist and veteran researcher of the Venera program. What he uncovered would reopen questions scientists thought were long buried and spark one of the most controversial claims in modern planetary science. Sanfomality was no outsider or amateur theorist. He had worked closely on the Venera missions during the Soviet era. Decades after the missions ended, he turned back to the Venera 13 surface images, particularly the high-resolution panoramic shots the lander had transmitted from Venus's hellish surface in 1982. Most had treated those images as historical relics that were remarkable, yes, but long outdated. Sanfomality didn't see them that way. What caught his attention were 3 anomaly objects that shouldn't have been there, or at the very least, shouldn't have changed between image frames.
Now, all this has happened after scientists recently discovered that the planet Venus contained phosphine gas.
The first anomaly was a disc-shaped object, partially embedded in the surface near one of the lander's mechanical arms. In one frame, the object appeared solid and clear. In the next, it had shifted slightly. It was not much, but enough to raise suspicion. If Venus is a dead world, nothing should be moving. The second anomaly was more unsettling, a scorpion-like form. It had multiple protrusions, almost leg-like, with a body that seemed to curve along the cracked terrain. Sanfomality noticed that the object's shadow had changed between frames, from growing longer and shifting direction, despite no shift in the lander's position or time of day. This wasn't a trick of light. Something had altered its shape or position. The third was the most mechanical-looking, a metal-like shard or plate, seen in one image near the edge of a rock, then absent in the next. Had it been dislodged by wind? This was unlikely, as Venus's atmosphere, though dense, isn't known for strong surface winds.
Venera 4 entered Venus's atmosphere and performed the first ever measurements of another planet's atmosphere.
And even if it were, this piece looked dense and solid, which was resistant to the kind of drift one might expect from a paper or dust-like fragment. In a paper published through Solar System Research, Sanfomality suggested something almost no one in mainstream science dared to propose. These objects might be living organisms, or evidence of active movement on Venus's surface. He was careful with his wording, but the implication was clear. These weren't camera glitches or sensor flukes. They showed movement, shadow variation, and positional shifts consistent with motility, the ability to move voluntarily on Venus. But the backlash came fast. Western scientists and skeptics dismissed the findings as classic image artifacts caused by lens flare, sensor blooming, or old Soviet optics struggling in high heat. They argued that the harsh conditions would fry any biological structure within seconds. After all, the Venera landers themselves only lasted minutes to hours before succumbing. So what was it? A camera malfunction that coincidentally mimicked lifelike movement? Environmental distortion from heat refraction? Or had something small, alien, and mobile crept across the Venera lander's field of view? Xanphomelites' theory didn't claim certainty. For Joe Rogan, it raised an impossible-to-ignore question. If Venus is dead, why do the pictures show things that move? And perhaps even more chilling, what else is hiding in those old Soviet photographs that no one ever bothered to look at twice? The answers would start surfacing the very next year in an archive no one expected. The files they hid, 2020 declassified photos. Spark panic. In 2020, a Soviet-era archive in Moscow quietly opened to limited researchers under a declassification initiative. Inside was something no one expected: a sealed file containing unpublished photographs from the Venera 13 and 14 missions taken by Soviet landers that touched down on Venus's surface in the early 1980s. These were not the cleaned official images that had appeared in textbooks or museum displays. These were raw frames, some clearly tampered with, and others simply left to decay. What happened next would reignite one of the most chilling questions in planetary science. What exactly did the Soviets find on Venus? The newly found images were in poor shape, with scratches, blur marks, missing timestamps, unexplained fogging, and geometric occlusions plagued nearly every frame. Some appeared to have been intentionally damaged. In multiple frames, straight-line distortions hinted at the use of analog tools to block sections, perhaps during physical film development or image printing. When the files were traced back to their archival log, researchers discovered something even more unsettling. The photographs were classified under military clearance, not scientific. That meant whatever the Venera landers captured wasn't just considered science, but was seen as a state secret. But modern researchers had a new advantage the original scientists did not: AI-powered image enhancement tools capable of clarifying low-resolution or corrupted data. When they began feeding the raw frames into neural filters and digital restorers, something incredible and disturbing emerged from beneath the static, beneath the noise. Analysts began to identify cell-like textures on rock formations. These were clusters that appeared to repeat in structured patterns not typical of erosion or mineral buildup. Others spotted branch-like filaments, thin and branching like fungal hyphae or coral formations, running along the edges of Venusian slabs. In one enhanced image, a distinct ripple formation appeared around a rock cluster, like the faint concentric disturbance caused by slow growth, or an organic layer expanding across the ground. These weren't random formations. They showed organization. Joe Rogan couldn't help but wonder why this photo had been buried, and why it wasn't released in 1982. And more importantly, what did the Soviets know back then? He addressed the mystery bluntly, saying that if these images are real, and they were taken decades ago, then the world has missed out on 50 years of information. Because if biological textures and strange movements were all recorded by Venera missions, and if they were intentionally buried, then that means humanity may have had its first evidence of alien life, not from Mars or Europa, but from Venus. And it was ignored, or worse, covered up. But perhaps most disturbing was a single frame from the Venera 14 batch, showing a thin gas plume rising from a jagged crack in the terrain. What it was shocked everyone. The phosphine clue, a ghost gas that shouldn't exist. In 2020, something strange rose from the clouds of Venus that lit a fire in the scientific world and cracked open decades of silence. Astronomers, using radio telescopes from Hawaii and Chile, detected faint but consistent signals of phosphine gas in the upper atmosphere of Venus.
Astronomers have detected the gas phosphine, pH 3, on the planet Venus.
To the untrained ear, that might sound unremarkable. But to astrobiologists, it was earth-shattering. Because on Earth, phosphine almost always means life. But what is phosphine, and why does it matter? Phosphine is a toxic, colorless gas. It's flammable, corrosive, and deadly to humans in large doses. But what makes it scientifically priceless is its origin story. On Earth, phosphine is almost exclusively produced by anaerobic organisms such as bacteria that live in oxygen-free environments like swamps, sewage, or the guts of animals. These microbes don't need sunlight or oxygen. Instead, they survive by breaking down organic material in dark, harsh conditions. And in doing so, they release phosphine as a waste product. You can make phosphine in a lab, but it takes high pressure, extreme heat, and highly reducing conditions, the kind not typically found in the upper atmosphere of a planet like Venus. So when telescopes picked up a spectral absorption spike in the Venusian clouds, one that matched the unique chemical fingerprint of phosphine, it raised a question no one was prepared to answer. What could possibly be producing phosphine in the skies of a hellish planet like Venus? 3 years after that 2020 discovery, one of the researchers quietly examining the declassified Venera mission images stumbled onto something bizarre. A restored infrared image from Venera 14 showed a faint haze rising near a surface crack. This haze didn't match any expected atmospheric behavior. When AI-assisted tools were used to digitally analyze the spectral data associated with that frame, something strange emerged. An absorption signature eerily similar to phosphine. Even stranger was a Soviet memo attached to the image from 1983 saying, "Surface geometry and spectral values inconsistent with known mineral data. Recommend classification and suppression until further analysis." The Soviets had detected something they didn't understand. The gas signature didn't align with sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, or the other known components of Venus's toxic atmosphere. And rather than publicize the anomaly, they classified the entire frame, burying it under military clearance for decades. Which leads to a chilling possibility. The USSR may have recorded the first phosphine evidence on Venus over 40 years ago and chose not to tell anyone. And this is what makes this so unsettling. Phosphine isn't just interesting, but controversial. After the original detection in 2020, a firestorm of debate began in the scientific community. Some argued that the gas could form through exotic non-biological chemistry under Venus's conditions. Others believed the data was flawed. But as more refined observations came in, phosphine kept showing up, consistently and stubbornly, at altitudes where temperatures were more temperate. That's where it gets creepy, because Venus's surface is a furnace, but its upper cloud decks, about 50-60 kilometers above the ground, have temperatures similar to Earth's tropics. And that's where the phosphine was found. This raises questions scientists never thought they'd be asking about Venus. Is there aerial microbial life surviving in the cloud layer? Did life once evolve on Venus when it was cooler and retreat to the skies as the planet baked? Could Venus host the most alien form of life imaginable, one that thrives in sulfuric acid and eats radiation? And now that the phosphine is confirmed and the haze matched with chemical readings buried for decades,
what we did was we went out and used radio telescopes to see if we could detect the presence of the molecule phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus.
it begs the question, what else did the Soviets find and never reveal? Proof in the pattern. Microbial colonies on the surface. In 2023, newly declassified and enhanced images from the Soviet Venera 13 lander were run through modern AI processors. What appeared on one frame stopped the research team cold. Across the rocky terrain, hexagonal formations had begun to emerge, symmetrical, repeating, and distinctly organized. These weren't camera glitches or data corruption. The pattern was too structured, too natural, but not geological. Scientists cross-referenced the formation with known Earth patterns and found a haunting match: biofilms. On Earth, biofilms are mats of microbial colonies, organisms that cling together and form tight, patterned communities in extreme environments like ocean vents, salt flats, or even radioactive waste. That's not the only thing that made researchers sit up. These hexagonal clusters shifted slightly across sequential frames.
These two sister missions both aim to understand how Venus became an inferno-like world capable of melting lead at the surface.
As if they were changing position or reorienting, the surface wasn't static, but subtly moving. And the kicker? These frames weren't just visual. The lander's infrared sensors, which had previously been dismissed as noisy or faulty, showed a spike in radiation absorption now known to be linked with phosphine, the same gas tied to microbial life on Earth. The spectral signature of this spike aligned precisely with the location of the hexagonal formations. It wasn't just one weird pattern. It was a visual, chemical, and thermal convergence, the kind of multi-channel evidence that researchers dream of.
Scientists are excited at the prospect of finding traces of a substance which may hold clues looking into the haze of Venus.
And yet, in a classified 1983 internal memo from Soviet Mission Control, this very frame was flagged with a chilling note. In other words, the Soviets saw something they couldn't explain, and rather than announce a discovery, they buried it. Modern scientists now believe that this could have been the first photographic evidence of extraterrestrial microbial life captured in 1982, lost to classified archives for 4 decades, and uncovered only by chance. What's even more disturbing is how long it took the world to connect the dots.
You can't go to Jupiter or Saturn, you can't go to Mercury or Venus. So if we want to go somewhere and expand our civilization, it has to be Mars.
1982. The photo is taken. 1983. It's marked for suppression. 2020. Phosphine is detected in Venus's atmosphere. 2023. Declassified Soviet data finally reveals the matching patterns and infrared spikes. All the clues were there, but no one put them together because no one was looking. Until now. Venus may not be the dead world we once imagined. Instead, it might be home to entire microbial systems, tucked beneath toxic clouds or clinging to the cracks of molten rock. And we may have had the evidence all along. This isn't science fiction anymore. It's history resurfaced. And it's only now that we realize we may have photographed alien life in 1982 and never knew it. And now NASA scientists are terrified. Why NASA scientists are unnerved. Venus was always considered a graveyard planet that was too hot, too hostile, and too violent for life to stand a chance. But now, with declassified photos, spectral data, and phosphine traces coming to light, that belief is starting to collapse. And for many at NASA and in the broader scientific community, the implications are deeply unsettling. If microbial life, or even hints of it, can exist on Venus, a planet with surface temperatures hot enough to melt lead, clouds laced with sulfuric acid, and pressures that would crush submarines, then all bets are off. It means life is not delicate or rare. It may be resilient, adaptive, and far more common than anyone dared to believe. This discovery shatters more than just scientific models. It dismantles decades of mission priorities. Billions have been funneled into Mars exploration under the assumption that Mars, being cooler and more Earth-like, offered the best chance of finding life. Venus was considered a dead end. Now, that assumption looks dangerously flawed. The shock goes even deeper. Scientists are beginning to question past mission data. If the Soviet Union recorded signs of life in the 1980s and mislabeled it as noise or instrument error, how many other missions may have done the same? It means many clues were ignored, not because the data was wrong, but but because our expectations were. The idea that alien life may have been found and buried 4 decades ago is more than frustrating. It's a wake-up call. The scientific process isn't immune to bias. In the Cold War, secrecy and national pride often took priority over global collaboration. But even today, politics, funding pressures, and public perception can steer research away from uncomfortable truths. That's why some voices like Joe Rogan's are asking hard questions. If evidence of life was dismissed because it didn't fit a neat narrative, then we have missed it because it was buried. There's also a real and immediate concern about contamination. With the possibility of a Venusian biosphere, even a microbial one, the stakes are higher for upcoming missions. What if our probes bring Earth bacteria to Venus and vice versa?
Among all of Earth's planetary neighbors, Venus is definitely the weirdest.
NASA and other space agencies must now grapple with the ethics of planetary protection. The fear isn't just finding life, but infecting it, or worse, bringing something back. These concerns have shifted Venus from a scientific curiosity to a biohazard puzzle. Researchers now advocate for stricter probe sterilization, deeper data transparency, and international coordination. The game has changed, and no one wants to repeat the mistakes of the past. NASA scientists aren't unnerved because we found life. They're unnerved because we might have found it long ago and never noticed. What happens now?
The planet Venus is stunningly beautiful. The only problem? Venus is hell.
The sudden reawakening of interest in Venus has shaken the scientific world, and the space race is shifting accordingly. After decades of near silence, Venus is back on the map. And this time, the missions aren't just about geology or atmospheric pressure. They're about life. NASA's upcoming Veritas mission is set to orbit Venus and generate high-resolution 3D maps of its surface, something never before accomplished at this scale. It aims to uncover signs of past volcanic activity, tectonic movements, and possible chemical signatures missed by earlier missions. But quietly, many believe Veritas will also be scanning for biosignatures for subtle hints that Venus may not be entirely dead. The European Space Agency's Envision mission will follow closely behind, with an advanced suite of radar and spectrometers. It plans to probe Venus's atmosphere and subsurface, investigating strange gas compositions and revisiting the spectral spikes originally dismissed by Cold War-era sensors. Envision's data could confirm or debunk the long-suppressed evidence now resurfacing. Meanwhile, India's Shukrayan-1 is in development, signaling a growing global interest in Venus. Its orbiters will provide atmospheric data and chemical analysis, offering a fresh, unbiased take on what might be happening on this hostile world.
Still, the surface appears to be very young. About 1,000 impact craters have been found, and they're evenly distributed around the planet.
Russia, too, is rumored to be reviving a Venera-style mission, decades after shutting down its original program. The motive is to possibly reclaim prestige, possibly to confirm what it may have already known and hidden. In the private sector, companies like SpaceX and Rocket Lab are brainstorming ways to tackle the ultimate challenge, creating high-pressure drones and landers capable of surviving longer on the surface. The hope is to develop machines that can not only land and observe, but maybe even collect samples and send them back.
Observations show that there's something shiny on the mountaintops, and snow fits the bill.
But that ambition raises one of the thorniest issues now facing space science. Should we? There's growing pressure for radical transparency in all new space programs. Scientists, ethicists, and the public are demanding open access to raw data, real-time findings, and clear protocols for handling potential life signs. After what happened with the declassified Soviet photos, secrecy is no longer acceptable. And yet, a haunting truth lingers in the background. The first proof of alien life may already exist in grainy images, forgotten notes, and blurry photos stored in aging archives. What happens now isn't just about Venus. It's about what we choose to see and what we dare to admit. What do you think about this discovery? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section. Kindly hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe for more amazing and inspiring videos. Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. See you in the next video.